Hey, okay, everyone. Bill Hood with Trucking MBA. We're going to try this here again. Let me get the mic here a little closer into me here. We're going to try this here again. I had started up this video and I saw a message come across my screen that one of our carriers had an accident, so I need to go take care of that. For those of you that aren't familiar, Velocity Group, we are a safety and compliance company. I think at the end of last month, we had about 32 carriers that we manage safety and compliance at some level, and dealing with insurance claims is part of it. So all good, nobody injured, fairly minor, just one of those pain in the butt things you don't want to have to deal with. So um, let's get started. So, Bill Hood, Velocity Group, and the Trucking MBA. And I'm getting kind of addicted to this Facebook Live thing here because it's given us I believe it gives us an opportunity to have more of an in-depth discussion about some of the areas around um, the business side of trucking. There's a lot of information that gets shared. I'm going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, saying everybody's well-meaning. But the problem with a lot of the mediums that we use right now to share information is we just get very little bits of information, and there's so much more in depth you need to get into to really make it make sense. And so being able to have conversations, and to me this is part of it, where we can have more of an in-depth conversation about some of the topics that are taking place that are to a certain extent timeless. That, this conversation today, I can almost guarantee you is going to be relevant 5 years from now, because I know it was relevant 5 years ago when I was running as far as trucks. So, but what I wanted to talk about is mentorship. Kenny Long has started a program with the Trucking with Authority, and he has his podcast and video that he does on a weekly basis, and lots of great information. One of the steps out there as far as getting things going and having a discussion with people out there. So I think that's a great idea. And the reason I say that is it allows people who are just getting into this industry to actually have discussions with people who have had more experience. Now, the other thing, as far as mentorship, if you've been around, especially if you're working, let's say, in the spot market, and you have somebody and you're mentoring somebody who's in the spot market, and you were back and you went through 2014, and then the rate changes of 2015, that transition, that time frame right there is so crucial. The lessons learned during that transition. I'm not saying that we're going to have 2019 is going to be the equivalent to 2015, but we will have a down market. And for people who are just getting into this industry right now, having somebody who's had experience and knowledge in working with that, if that's the market you're into, as far as you're working with the spot market, I think is a critical thing to helping people prepare themselves for when these markets do change. So, and that's just one piece why I say I believe as far as the mentorship. Now, there's another thing that really jumps out at me, and I think hopefully people who get into being mentors, and I believe being a mentor, you get as much out of it as you give. I can tell you this from uh, well, I'm going on 10 years now working in the spot market business and being one of the first companies that pioneered the self-dispatch model out there. I can tell you this, that I have changed my thoughts about how to look at business and what to do about the business, and both from an independent owner operator, or if you're starting a trucking company. I've had definitely my ups and downs as far as running a trucking company, and I've learned quite a bit from that. So being a mentor and working with people, you can get probably as much back as you give out to people as far as helping. So, but one of the other areas besides just the market that I see, and I've said this for years, and I've had pushback from people. I was talking to somebody about understanding uh, what's happening with manufacturing and with rail and with ocean freight. And somebody was saying, you know what, I got one truck, I run spot markets. Why do I care what's happening in the rail? And while that's kind of the extreme examples, I tell you this, that being able to know that, hey, you know what, don't have a lot going on right now coming over, being on ships. So what we're going to see is in a month from now, the ports of LA and Texas and Savannah, and so all the ports around the country are going to slow down. So we can expect to see that there's going to be less demand for trucks, which falls into the supply and demand side of the business. That leads me into the next thing is that there is a disconnect, I think, with a lot of owner operators out there that don't understand that supply and demand is a real factor and really impacts what's happening out there with rates. And yeah, the driver's fine. It was a minor parking lot accident. Everybody's okay. No towaways. Uh, Pictures look pretty good. Thank you. Um, so there's a disconnect on that, and that supply and demand does happen. And we're looking at right now. I'm recording this for future viewers. I'm recording this in August of 2018, and while we have had an absolute fabulous year in terms of the markets from a carrier perspective, not if you're a consignee and you're paying for freight, but from a carrier perspective, but an absolute fabulous year out there. But the typical July slowdown is taking place. So what we're seeing is less demand out there, and it's actually we're starting to see a slowdown. Now, perspective is also a huge thing here. So you want to put some things in perspective. We look at July, August 2018 rates, and the people who really don't understand the markets and probably not really what's going on out there, crying and complaining about the rates. And trust me, I get it. It's harder. You're going to make a bunch more calls. I got clients that would ship 10 loads a week or shipping 4. So there's less of our trucks get booked up with that regular freight that we have. So yeah, I mean, it impacts everybody. But if we look at this and we compare this back to last year, we still have better rates and we still have more demand out there. Even with the droves of new companies that are coming into this business, there's still a pent-up demand in some markets. So by understanding the supply and demand and seeing what happens in the changes in the markets, these are things that in the trucking business that you need to understand so that you can make changes. Now, when I talk about 14 to 15, there's a lot of people, for me, rate per mile is an index. It's out of all the numbers you need to know, rate per mile is probably the least meaningful number that you need to know. But unfortunately, it is the number that most of the energy is put into. So, and I bring that back to 2015 is that people didn't know their numbers. They didn't know their true costs. They didn't know what kind of gross revenue they needed and what kind of profit margin they needed in order to cover their personal expenses. And from a carrier that had 80 plus trucks during that time, I think we were about 70 trucks at the time coming to 2015, and seeing that, what happens first when somebody doesn't know their numbers, they don't need, let's say they need $200 a day profit in order to pay their personal expenses. Well, what starts to happen is those non-urgent expenses in the trucking business, the money you put aside for tires, you put aside for repairs, the maintenance accounts, those are the first things that get hit. Those are the first things that you ignore. So what happened in 2015 is everybody was focused on this number of the rate per mile and what they were going to haul at, that they weren't generating the gross revenue, the profit, and the profit, two separate numbers, but they weren't generating the profit that they needed to basically pay their personal expenses. And they weren't pivoting, they weren't shifting to different lanes to understand the supply and demand cycle to say, hey, you know what? There's more demand in this market, so I'm going to be able to generate the revenue and the profits that I need in this market. So I got to stop doing what I was doing last year when I was absolutely killing it. And what happened was, the first thing that happened is they didn't have the money to make repairs. And we started to see driver after driver not having the money to make repairs. It was one piece that got us into trouble there, is because of money we loaned to some of these guys that we shouldn't have done. But it was one of those, we look back on it and we really started to see this steady decline. Our average gross revenue per week per truck dropped dramatically. Yet I can guarantee you, most of those guys where that revenue dropped dramatically, their personal expenses did not drop dramatically. Their personal expenses were still there. What was happening is they weren't making enough money to cover their bills. And that is a recipe for disaster. So part of having a mentor and having somebody that can come in and can talk about some of these things is something that I think is critical for people, especially if you're new and you're going through this fabulous market right now. Hopefully you're feeling kind of a little bit of the pullback that is July and August. That's normal every year, but there's a lot of people who just got into this that don't know what's going on. It's normal. It happens. The other thing, as far as I think some of a good business mentor, I'll tell you this, a lot of the people I think will make the best mentors are the people you will never see complain about a broker. I'm going to put this in a little perspective. Imagine you went on Facebook and you got into a group that was primarily brokers, and you had a broker that didn't just talk negatively about trucking companies and truck drivers. Because trust me, there are a ton of bad drivers out there, far more bad drivers than there are good ones. But didn't just talk bad about them, but said, you know what? I don't ever want to deal with another truck driver again. I want to deal with a dispatcher, a load planner, an executive in a company. If I never have to talk to a truck driver again, that is fine. They're nothing but lazy slobs. The complete and utter disdain for the truck driver. What do you think you would do when it came to booking a load with that person? Would you even call that person? Likely not. Yet, we have people who 100% rely on brokers for their income, for what they're doing, that will come out and basically say, you know what, before you push the lawyers to the bottom of the ocean, push the brokers in first, because I want the lawyers to make sure you hold them down. That they have such a disdain for brokers, the people who give them the freight that they haul and the revenue that they make. These are people who don't go out and get their own freight, and they rely on the spot market and dealing with brokers. They have complete and utter disdain. They don't understand the market. All they know about their truck. They know how to drive a truck, back a truck, shut the doors, put a seal on, maybe check the oil. But there's a disconnect. They've probably never walked into a brokerage office. They've probably never personally met with a broker. They definitely don't take quarterly, try to go out with their top customers. So they really don't understand that what happens in that market. Then there's another disconnect. There seems to be this feeling out there that consignees, shippers, receivers, the people who are booking the freight, are absolute clueless idiots. And brokers drive everything. The broker gets $1,000 from these guys on the load and sells it for $400. Now, am I naive enough to say that doesn't happen? Absolutely, that happens. But that is not the norm. The norm is you have companies that have 20 million, 30 million, more than that in transportation spend. And what these companies are doing is they are hiring companies that come in as consultants to make sure they're educated and that they're getting the best rates out there in the market. And what happens is those companies, because they're as knowledgeable as the brokers and far more knowledgeable than most trucking companies or small trucking companies and independent owner operators on the markets, what they're doing is they're coming back to their broker and they're saying, sorry, it's the second week in July. Things have dropped off significantly. I'm not paying that rate anymore. I got 5 other people I can go to that can book this. If you want it, you're gonna have to reduce the rate. That is reality in a vast majority of the freight out there. So you couple it with the fact that they've got less freight, they've got contracted carriers already. So now what's happening is most of it's going to contracts, so there's less going out into the spot market. And what they're doing is they're giving pushback on the rates. Now the rates will come back up as we start to see the demand increase as we get further into this year here. This is a normal cycle. So these are the types of things and knowledge that a mentor who is a business-minded person, somebody who understands the businesses that they work with and that can help educate new people out there as far as what they're doing and what to expect and what to go through. Now, one thing I'll throw out there also as we're talking about brokers, if you are running spot market and you're working with brokers, I highly recommend that you take some time and you go into a brokerage office and you meet with somebody you're working with, you develop a relationship, you see what goes on in there, take them out to lunch, take them to dinner, whatever, spend some time, get to see what happens in there, and do that as many times as financially possible. When we had our company, we had a goal, our top 5 revenue generating customers, we wanted to go out every quarter and meet with them. And we ended up developing a lot of business and some additional, I want to say, additional relationships. For example, one very large one that did not believe in the dedicated rep model where you had a carrier rep, gave us a carrier rep after we met with them. And that was supremely helpful because they could sit there and they could tell the customer side, the people that had the freight, hey, you know what? I know this company. They are rock solid. I know the owners of this company. You can get them on the phone if one of their drivers screws up. So you had an advocate on your side within there. Now, that's not to say everything was perfect, but bring it back here is just getting that understanding, that knowledge, and actually seeing what is happening in a brokerage, I think would be very enlightening. Now, the other thing, as far as from a knowledge standpoint, from the brokerage, take a look at some of the publicly traded brokers out there. Take a look at their financial statements, and if you're not quite sure what you're reading, get a hold of somebody who does know something and educate you. Because I think you'd be pretty surprised at how little profit a brokerage actually makes. There seems to be this idea that brokers are making 50% of the load in profit. No, they're making, a good brokerage is hitting 13% margin, and of that, so $1,000 they're getting $130 to pay all their overhead, and at the end of the day, maybe they got $1 or $2 left, and that is not far-fetched out of there. That's 1-2% margins is not unheard of, as far as or not margin, 1 or 2% profits is not unheard of in brokerage. So anyways, hey, you know what? I appreciate comments. Love to, if you see other people that are doing business related videos or things and they're really business minded, let me know, because I'm really looking to open up a conversation, a dialogue